Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Well, welcome everybody. It's my privilege to welcome Mr. Joe Krieger to the show today. Joe is the president and founder of Boston Biolife, and this is our very first show being promoted by our friends at Top Doctor magazine. There's one of your great Massachusetts families there, Mr. Kennedy on the cover of one, and another cover recently, and another cover. And I believe at some point you were the cover boy for Top Doctor.
I was. I actually, I was just showing you my cover. I should have kept it out, but I have my own cover of Top Doctor magazine, and looking a little younger those days, I think.
There you go. There you go. You were the cover boy. But today we really want to talk about what Boston Biolife does, because you guys are just a resource for the medical industry. So let me read a little bit. 25 years at the forefront of healthcare and life sciences, driven by a vision to streamline translational medicine, an interdisciplinary approach uniting lab discoveries, clinical practice, and community impact. You've built BBL to be an accelerator and the integration of cutting-edge technologies into every medical practice, connecting healthcare to high-quality leads to offering accredited training that supports groundbreaking scientific advances. Your work has also consistently focused on one core: transforming patient care and driving better health outcomes, which I think is something that we all want. And Joe, there's so much to Boston Biolife. Rather than me talking about it, I'd rather have you talk about it and share with everybody a little bit about the resources that they can find at Boston Biolife.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. So really, Boston Biolife is a cumulative expression of all the things I've done in the medical field in my entire life. As a young person, I was interested in biology. I was interested in nature. I was interested in science. And I was able to make my way through college and undergraduate and into medical school as a PhD, MD candidate. And then I wasn't able to complete my medical degree, but I got into medical devices. And what I learned from the medical device world is you really had to provide training opportunities for the healthcare providers if they were going to learn a new skill. And I was in the minimally invasive imaging world with some company that was doing neurosurgical pain management. They had some cardiology products, but really it was back in the lap chole time when people were starting to figure out that they could use portals and endoscopic technologies to reach vital organs in the body and not have to cut people open. So back then, that was the revolutionary skill that was transforming healthcare, much like we see things today in the laboratory sciences transforming healthcare, but this is 30 years ago. And really, physicians were trying to figure out, how can I access critical structures in the body without doing open surgery? And then what do I do when I get there? So what are the modalities? And things like radio frequency and cryo and ionizing radiation, these are always the tools that the physicians have been using to to kill a tumor, or to remove an occlusion, or open up a blood vessel, something that's preventing an organ or a tissue to be healthy. And so we used to provide the training. I was really the product manager, so I would get the anatomical specimens and bring them to the hotels and coordinate the x-ray equipment and hire all the teachers, and then run the symposiums that would teach the physicians new and emerging therapies. So it started with low back pain and pain management and made its way all the way through the different spine iterations, minimally invasive discectomies, and surgical innovations along orthopedic. And then eventually I ended up in the life sciences side of things 30 years later.
Tell us about the birth of Boston Biolife some 25 plus years ago.
Well, Boston Biolife as a company started 10 years ago, actually this month. So it's our 10th year anniversary. And it was really an interesting evolution. As often, many things happen unintentionally. And so I was retired and I had spent some time with my kids, and I realized that retirement was really not in my best interest because I was still actively involved in learning and trying to develop technologies. And the one thing about running these training programs that really got in my blood was it's an unbelievable opportunity to develop new products. So I've really been part of probably dozens of new innovations in healthcare, new devices, new machines, new products, new technologies. And not all of them were that big a deal, but a lot of them had to come from just talking with engineers to doctors over in a training session, looking at how can I take this device that I'm using to get into this part of the body. And if I change the way that the head's oriented or the handle's oriented or how thick it is or how long it is, can that help innovate a new therapy? And so a lot of times the simplest thing. So we took like a straight needle and we bent it so it could get around a corner. Instead of making it sharp, we made it blunt. And that became like the curved blunt injection needle. It became a multi-million-dollar product. Looking at like energy modalities, every time you'd use like a cautery machine or an energy device, it needs to return the energy back to the body through the body. So you have these grounding pads. They were using these flimsy metal plates and putting this like an ultrasound glue on it, and they weren't really adequate for high intensity energy applications. So people would use a Valley Lab pad and it wasn't adequate. And so it would change the impedance reading. They weren't stable. So I worked with a company to create a big grounding pad that would absorb the energy and put just a connector on. A very simple device. Then we sold it $2 million the first year, $4 million the second year. And it was simple. It was a simple thing that needed, but the industry, the technologies needed it. And it was like that, but that came from running cadaver labs, oddly enough. And so a lot of innovation came, a lot of medical imaging software. When you look at trying to get into, say, you're trying to access the disc of the spine and you're using fluoroscopy, but the patient had a prior MRI, is there a way to correlate the MRI with the real fluoroscopy? So when the surgeon is going to place a needle at the disc, with the idea being the least invasive approach, you could always cut the patient open, remove everything and screw it together, whatever. And that's what the prior, so minimally invasive spine was really looking at how do I access these critical structures in the least invasive way? And how do I help these patients without cutting them open? Right. And so you'd have an endoscope, and sometimes the endoscope would have to have a certain amount of ports in it so you could get a probe in there or a little instrument, et cetera. So all of those, so that's what I really enjoyed about the educational experience was it gave us an opportunity. Simple things like just taking an X-ray machine and making it more radiation conscious, because the radiologists weren't the ones using it anymore. The physicians were. So radiologists would be called to an OR to help a urologist image something. The pain doctors bought their own C-arms, put them in their own clinics, and started treating these low back pain patients. So they needed to know about fluoroscopic safety. They needed to know about radiation, radiological anatomy. They didn't understand what X-ray was. Much the early pioneers didn't understand what X-ray was. I don't know if you've ever seen the slideshows on the Houdini brothers, but they used to X-ray each other. And people used to have severe problems with X-ray, burning their tissue. And there was a lot of controversy about that back in, I think, the early 1900s. But suffice it to say, combining endoscopy with fluoroscopy using prior modalities like CT or MR kind of became how minimally invasive surgery began to evolve, so that we could do hernias with through portals, or we could do minimally invasive like knee surgeries without having to open the patient up. So that was really how I got my start in medicine. But Boston Biolife was really the next iteration where we looked the future of healthcare. Where was that going to come from? It's going to come from a lab, right? So I started looking at things like CRISPR-Cas9 and 3D printing and monoclonal antibodies, some of the CAR-T, CAR-NK, transgenic organs, a lot of ways that the laboratory scientists, exosomes, were creating research tools. And how did the healthcare providers learn, like what was the latest cancer thing? What was the latest organ transplant? How would I was coming from a lab that could be used by a doctor? And that's how I stumbled onto the idea, translational medicine. Sometimes, just for example, if you have tumor, you can train an antibody to attach itself to a tumor and only the tumor, and then you could hook to that something that would be deleterious to the cell. So much like a Trojan horse, the antibody docks on the tumor says, "What's this?" It opens it up, it brings it in, and boom, it kills it. So that was technologies, photobiomodulation, photoablation, things like that. Oddly enough, when I started to, when I built the company and was starting to run those type of courses, all the doctors from my past had started to reach out to me because they were doing things with the disc and they wanted to learn how to regrow the nucleus of the disc rather than doing spine surgery and removing it. So that was regenerative medicine, which I ran a couple courses in that, minimally invasive disc regeneration, which then led to all the orthopedic orthobiologics. So PRP, bone marrow harvesting, adipose technologies, and then the perinatal sciences, all in an effort to replace, to help physicians regrow cartilage, to stop joint replacements or help patients that needed joint replacements prior. And then that led us into a whole, and that was 10 years ago. And we're still doing not the same thing, but a lot of other things have come to the fore that are just as important as the regenerative medicine, if not more important. It's more on the
So,
functional side.
so here's a couple of questions out of all of that, Joe. So, first of all, how do you get the engineers and the doctors to communicate, two very distinct but brilliant groups of people? How do you get those guys to communicate so that the outcome becomes beneficial for we, the patient, that has an issue?
In many cases, industry is where education comes from. So the companies that develop the technologies typically are building new products. Let's just say we're looking at doing a bone marrow harvest and a bone marrow aspiration technique for a knee, right? So we're going to have a product where you're going to have the bone marrow harvesting needle. There's a technique where the company teaches the doctor this is the best way to approach the iliac crest. And the engineers that have developed the products are like, the handle works like this. And so, really, through industry, we're able to extrapolate the ideas of the engineer to the needs of the doctor through the company to provide a tool that's, in many cases, this stuff, none of these products existed for the purposes they were being used. A jam sheeting needle was for a bone marrow transplant, but that wasn't for joint rejuvenation. It was for whatever reason you would transplant bone marrow, graft versus host disease, some other leukemia, other immune areas, not joint replacement. So people started saying, was this really the best way to do this? Is this really the best device to do this? So really through education, teaching a physician how to use a product or to learn a new technique, typically you bring industry and they bring in the engineers. And then that combination of doctor, scientist, and engineer really is the driving force for the new innovation. That's the three-legged stool, really.
And you mentioned regenerative medicine. And, like, for example, I go to a chiropractor here in Texas, and that's actually the name of his practice.
Yeah,
And what I've watched, and here's really my question, and you're such a keen observer of this with all the years you've been around this. There was a time where a chiropractor and an orthopedist, for example, wouldn't have lunch in the same restaurant. It was like, you're a Boston guy, I'm a New York guy. It's kind of like the Yankees wouldn't have lunch with the Red Sox,
yeah,
or vice versa, right?
yeah.
All of a sudden, it seems, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I'd love your observation on this. All of a sudden, that chiropractor started to work with an orthopedist and then started to work with a regular MD on, you mentioned PRP, on doing PRP,
Yeah,
stem cells, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been a beneficiary and a big fan of, personally helped me big time with not only my hips, but my right shoulder. But
yeah.
your thoughts on that? Where did that mutual interest of good science, breakthrough science, come into play, where all of a sudden some of these guys said, hey, maybe my education is different than yours, but let me see what you know, and vice versa, and most importantly, how can we help the patient and get the best outcome?
Yeah, it's not the first time this has happened. Back in the pain management days, the neurosurgeons hated the anesthesiologists because they felt like they were taking their pain patients. But honestly, the pain patient, the anesthesiologists weren't getting help from anywhere. All they had was drugs and injections to help these people. So they started doing more interventional stuff. It was really the orthopedic spine surgeon that started to say, why don't we take the neurosurgeon? I'll be the orthopedic guy. Let's get the pain guy and the chiropractor in one clinic. We'll get an MRI and we'll walk this patient from a beginning through a process, which could ultimately end up in surgery. So now fast forward into the regenerative, the chiropractic. The chiropractors are heir apparent of a lot of first front line medicine because it's you got to think of where do people go when they stub their toe or their back hurts or their hip hurts. They don't necessarily go emergency room or to the hospital. So the chiropractors became really specialists at managing a lot of different complexities for patients on a one-off basis, really masters of learning how to make money $30 at a time every 20 minutes. They're cracking somebody in a different room. But they really had to reach out to learn all the contributing etiologies that created the patient's problem. So whether it was inflammatory issue or a lifestyle issue, a behavior, how they sleep, do they drink, do they work out, are they under stress? So they start fielding all these factors and wondering, is that why his hips are not adjusted? So under the guise of adjustments and spinal wellness, the chiropractors evolved into these jack of all trades. Now they started to do regenerative medicine, but they realize that up until a point that they're out of the scope of their clinical purview when it comes to certain things. So it wouldn't be uncommon for a chiropractor to team up with an orthopedic surgeon and say, listen, I have these patients. I'm done them up to here. I can't go any further. They need this and this. You're good at the needle. We have nurse practitioners filling these roles as well as family medicine doctors that may not even know as much as the chiropractor, but they've got the MD label. So they're given more latitude. So really, logic dictated that walking a patient through a pathway of less invasive to more invasive through this regenerative medicine, kind of this hallway, if you will, of different, you might try PRP, or you might try fat, you might try bone marrow, you might use shock wave with ultrasound, anything that you can really try to help get the patient's inflammation down to start to stimulate healing. And so there's just the chiropractors have the patience and the orthopeds have the know-how. So I think it was a logical evolution of how the cats and the dogs would to live together in harmony.
But the word biohack comes
Mm,
up a lot
yeah,
lately. I think since COVID, I think around COVID's the first time I ever heard it. I think I heard Dave Asprey say it,
yeah.
or David Wolf, or one of those guys who listen to a podcast like everybody was during COVID, listen to 50 podcasts a week. But regardless of who said it first or what, can you describe biohacking and its relevance in our healthcare today?
All right. So I think COVID was a very interesting time in medicine in that you join one or two camps that you stay home every day and wear your mask and try to be compliant and stay out of harm's way, or you really were looking at improving your own health and wellness so you didn't need to be so afraid of the virus. Maybe your immune system was the gateway to health and wellness. And I think people realized that, and the word biohacking was really a term that meant like, how do I personally do certain things to give myself the most optimized chance to be healthy, regardless of what's happening around me? So even something as simple as washing your hands, right? Or staying, these were all tools. But people realized that their immune system was a very important component, that there were certain things that we did in our everyday lives that weren't necessarily consistent with giving us the best possible health and wellness, like sleeping. Where do we go to work every day? Are we surrounded by blue light? What kind of stress do we endure? How do we eat? Do we exercise? Do we drink? What other factors are happening in our lives epigenetically that are affecting how we show up from a physical standpoint? And so over time, the smallest thing. So there's a thing called a cell danger response. And it's really the root cause of every disease on the face of the earth that plagues mankind. And it starts in the gut, and it has to do with the gut bacteria. And when the gut bacteria break down to the point where the mucus of the stomach starts to overwhelm the stomach lining, there becomes cracks, fissures, and openings, which allows undigested food products, which contain all kinds of things from microplastics to pesticides to normally the liver, kidney, lungs, pancreas filter these things, right? But when they fall directly into the bloodstream, it spikes the immune system to the point where the immune system's like, wow, what is all this stuff? And instead of having, it can't attack the foreign invaders the way it would a bacteria or a virus. So over time, the mitochondria excrete extracellular ATP. And ATP is the energy component that the mitochondria create for the cell. But when the mitochondria shoot ATP outside of the cell, it's a flare that'll tells the immune system we're under attack, start to power down. So the littlest things, this is what Crohn's, lupus, Lyme, chronic fatigue syndrome, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, all these small malingering fibromyalgia, these are diseases or conditions that come from the state of mild to medium to high chronic inflammatory conditions in the body. And everybody has them. And when you combine them with normal aging, things like steroid hormones fall, stress hormones rise, neurotransmitters change. And if you're behaving, life is stressful, if you're drinking or you don't exercise, you eat poorly, or you smoke or do any number of other things, all of those things contribute slowly but surely over time to help the body break down. So when you move into things like arthritis or ALS or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, those are really longer term versions. Most diseases present 20 to 30 years prior. There's biomarkers and there's indicators, not only genetic markers, but other markers in the body that can tell you what pathway you are, amyloid proteins, for example. And we've just started to measure for these things. But all of these conditions come from initially the gut allowing toxins in the bloodstream, which affect the immune system. The immune system can't, it's called like it's like Stockholm syndrome. They have to appease their captor. They can't, it's like 10 cops and there's 1,000 people rioting. What are they going to do? They're going to try to make sure they don't burn down the buildings, but try to like not, they can't engage with them because they don't have the manpower. So the immune system doesn't have the ability to take control of the health of the body. So slowly you just live in these states that, you don't really notice it because day after day you live about your life. So when 10 years go by and 20 years go by, and maybe your joints hurt or your testosterone level, you have no energy, maybe your hair is falling out, maybe you have ED, all of these conditions that we associated with middle age, aging, they're all driven by the same process. So I like to say it's like a house and a tree branch went through the whole roof and it created a hole. So when it rains, the water comes in. Some of it goes through the insulation and down the wall. Some of it goes down the foundation to the basement. Some of it affects the electrical system. The hole lets the squirrels and raccoons in. They start to gnaw on the wires. So you can go fix the foundation and repaint the ceiling and redo the wire and change the light switch and even put some traps out for the animals. But unless you fix that hole in the roof, you're never going to fix that problem. So the good news is we know what causes it. The bad news is most people are already fully underway into some type of process. But like I like to say, the problems are complicated, but the solutions are simple. We're animals. We're not designed to be living in these complex worlds. Our societal world and our biological world have not evolved in anywhere close to being congruent ways. So we're under stress like never before. So you'll probably hear other people talk this way. But when you were a caveman and the saber-toothed tiger came by and tried to eat you, you might have to run for your life. And you were under incredible stress, fight or flight, cortisol, the whole thing, right? And your adrenaline's going crazy. We live like that 24 hours a day. That mechanism is pinned in our life, whether it's our work, our relationships, our jobs, whatever it is, our health, our fears, in our lives. Everybody is under some form of stress to make a living, stress to perform, to show up, to be there for their families. And we also, because we're social creatures and we have the ability to reason, we do other things like drink and smoke and eat poorly. We don't have, but if you look at like a bull, it's 800 pounds, it's all muscle. All it does is stand outside and eat grass We don't know if they got hormones and stuff, but just assuming it's just a normal animal in nature, maybe a buffalo or a bison, right? It's not eating protein. It's not going to the gym. It's not doing anything other than just living, but it is receiving energy from the sun. It's grounded to the earth. It's eating nutrition from the ground. It's not toxic, not poisoned. So we really get back to basics with diet, exercise, nutrition, fresh air, sunshine, and get rid of the toxins. So we have toxins that build up in our body every day. So exercise is the best way to clear that. So you can a lot of supplements around detox. So take out the old stuff and keep bad stuff from coming in. Help boost your immune system so that you can protect yourself against. So biohacking is really using all the tools that the industry has created to help you fight back against inflammatory conditions that the body's built up over years. So red light therapy is one, hyperbaric oxygen, simply driving oxygen deeper into tissues, right? As we're less and less active, our hearts pump less and less blood to the furthest extremes of the body. So look at somebody who has neuropathy, or let's look at a type 2 diabetic patient. The type 2 diabetes patient has crazy blood sugar, probably because of their diet. They don't work out, so they don't have exercise to remove the toxins from their blood. So these things build up over time. Because of other factors, oftentimes the extremities don't have the same blood supply. That's why you have the podiatry element of it, where people get ulcers that don't heal, and then they're in the foot thing, and their legs get amputated. All of those are caused by this massive inflammatory condition that's come from the lifestyle and the behavior of that patient. Yeah, and genetics are too, obviously, but we're only 20% a victim of our genetics. Just because you have a gene doesn't mean you get a disease. There's a probability there. So people have learned. So you have energy modalities, you have chemical issues like peptides and hormones and supplements, right? And then you have red light and hyperbaric and cryo and sauna. And then you have other tools. There's a billion supplements replacing what the body should be getting from its natural environment. And all biohacking is the combination of all these. So whether it's meditating, taking certain vitamins, hormone replacement therapy, getting into a sauna or cryo or a red light box, there's any number of these. But the industry has literally exploded, which in my opinion is good because it means the average person is taking personal responsibility for their own health and wellness. And that's what's driving change in healthcare. Nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants to wait to be the next lockdown. So I can't go out, or I can't experience this, or I have to wear a mask. And we know that traditional medicine is only going to get us so far. There's been a lot of advances. Cancer deaths are down, survival rates are up, early diagnosis, new therapies. God bless all the research. But when it comes to day-to-day living, most of the things that we do every day are bad for us, whether they're preservatives in food, sugar. I call them unforced errors. And a lot of times it's not what you do, it's what you don't do. Don't drink soda. Don't go to Starbucks. Don't eat anything white. No sugar, no flour, no milk, at least for a period of time, that maybe you can get a handle on some of these things. If you look at a lot of international, like Mediterranean diet, or even South American food, it's more meat and vegetables, where we've got so much carbohydrates and other things, but it's really sugar. It's high fructose corn syrup and a lot of preservatives. And that's what RFK is doing. He's going through like just the thing, like instead, like French fries, instead of using vegetable oil, use beef tallow. That one thing, he's not saying get rid of McDonald's. What he's saying is how do these companies prepare their foods? And I think you see it a lot in with people that have come to America from other countries, especially younger kids that are eating our food. They're 200-300 pound 14-year-olds. That's not normal. That's their immune systems responding to the poison in our food, period. I don't care if that kid ran on the treadmill for 3 days. It's not going to matter. It's epigenetics.
You watch a lot of old movies, which I do. I drive my wife crazy sometimes because I'd rather watch a black and white movie from the 40s or 50s sometimes. But I was saying to somebody earlier on a podcast, I said, it's funny. They might be walking around with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other. But when did you, outside of maybe Orson Welles and maybe Alfred Hitchcock to a degree, for the most part, you never really saw overweight actors or actresses.
Yeah,
You know, what changed, I think, was that processed food that all of a
it
sudden
is.
made. Whenever it did, was I think it was late '60s, maybe early '70s. But I love your thoughts on that because you mentioned food. I noticed the same thing. I work out sometimes at a local high school, and I watch the kids when they make them do. It's not even really gym class anymore. I don't know what they call it, but they'll walk around the track with their cell phones, of course. And some of these kids are 14, and they're 300 pounds already, and it's got to be the food, obviously. But love your thoughts on that. And let me let you respond to that. And I have a follow up question to that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I think are culturally, there's more sedentary too, right? And they're also stressed out. So cortisol, our stress hormone, really affects all the other neurotransmitters in our body. It's 60 cycle interference to our pathways. So as our body, we have alpha, beta, theta, delta in our brain waves and things as simple as sleep. People don't sleep very well anymore. Don't sleep enough, right? So we've got high stress lives, very sedentary lives. We're inundated with artificial light. We're in even buildings, like people look at mold toxicity. You can, if you follow some of these functional medicine groups and you listen to some of their speakers, some people, everything's mold. Some people, it's all glucose, some type of high fructose corn syrup. But it's really a combination. It's your predisposition with your lifestyle, with your behavior, and your environment. So it's not easy. And I think a lot of times it's coming from drinks, coming from Starbucks, it's coming from your Dunkin' Donuts. When in Boston, we have America Runs on Dunkin's. There's Quincy, Massachusetts, was the beginning of Dunkin' Donuts. And I used to say, yeah, no kidding. Go to Walmart on a Sunday and just look at the people. And no offense to anyone, the people, nobody really knows this. They just, what do you buy your kids? Chicken nuggets. I buy them French fries. I buy them, what do little kids eat? Chicken wings, pizza, chicken nuggets, French fries. All that food's garbage. They don't eat vegetables. And the families are busy, so they don't make that. So everything's quick, fast food. And under the guise of safety, I think they've poisoned it. Now, again, did they know? I don't think there's some malevolent entity that's dictating all this. I think it's one hand not talking to the other. I think it's incompetence. I think it's poor understanding. Everything's done under the guise of safety, ironically. We're making your food safe. So if a fig Newton's sitting on a shelf and you pick it up and the cookie's 2 years old and it's still soft, you've seen the thing with the Twinkie never ages, or they take the McDonald's hamburger and they just leave it on the counter. Like 2 years later, it looks exactly the same. I don't know. And it's not like I eat half of whatever is put in front of me. I can't figure it out because all right, fish. Fish is great, right? Fish is healthy. No, fish has got mercury. The oceans are full of poison. If you eat fish, you get this. It's okay. Beef, let's go to beef. Beef's got hormones and peptides and pesticides, and the grass it eats is okay, great. Let's go to chicken. All right, so another chicken. What's wrong with the chicken, right? The chicken's not, it's not free range. It's got this. So how about if we eat a little bit of chicken, we'll eat some vegetables, and we'll walk around the block and try to stay away from McDonald's, Mountain Dew, and Starbucks. Meditate at the Dave Asprey biohacking conference. All the speakers had a common theme, in my opinion, was meditation. The mind runs the show. And we're so stressed out because that stress response, that cortisol release, whether we're aware of it or not, it's wreaking havoc with our neurochemistry. And our neurochemistry, the great Patrick Porter, one of our clients who runs BrainTap, and he has these electronic meditation devices, the glasses with light and sound. And he's trying to help 1 billion kids from all over the world be smarter, right? To be more mindful and really going down in younger and younger in age. He says that you have the world's greatest pharmacy between your ears, and it literally can create hundreds of thousands of dollars in chemicals that can change your life if you know how to access it. And that's if you follow this, all the greatest thinkers that have discussed chi and mindfulness and a lot of the ancient Medicines are being revisited now because plant botanicals are now being compounded for stress, anxiety, weight loss, nutrition, mindfulness. We've men's health, women's health. So there's this pivot back to history, to what we used to know.
Along those lines, my next question on that, Joe, was you take what David Sinclair's doing up there, you take what Walter Longo's doing at UCLA, you take some of the other doctors that are working with longevity, where less is more. And what I mean by that is less food, more fasting, be it intermittent fasting, be it water fasting, be it long-term fasting, giving your body a chance to heal and rest has become so important. And along those lines, you mentioned sleep a few minutes ago. I know you were at the biohacking convention there with Dave Asprey last week. I know what a lot of those guys are talking about in terms of resting the eyes, even wearing special glasses to protect the internet, et cetera, et cetera. Just let me your thoughts on all of that. But I just said there, from longevity to rest to sleep to getting off some of these devices more and giving both your brain and your eyes rest, as well as giving your gut a rest.
Yeah, the eyes are very important. There's a whole world of science now looking at the eyeball as a neurological biomarker. You can see Alzheimer's in the eye. The retina is the gateway to the brain, and we get a lot of energy through the eyes, right? There's a whole group of people called the mitochondriacs that swear by it. The sunlight comes through your eyeball, goes to your retina, goes to your mitochondria. But I think in general, people have this perception of weakness if they don't sleep 8 hours, or if they sleep more than 6 hours. I'm an Iron Man. I go to bed at 11 and I get up at 5 and I go to the gym and I do blah, blah, blah. And I think it serves you well to a point. And I think there's a sleep deficit. I think you can catch up, but I think over time, if you're under, because it really, what the brain does, if you look at the different aspects of sleeping, then when you get to REM sleep, which they've shown that most people don't spend enough time, and that's when the body cleans up all the misfolded proteins and the cellular debris and the damage that impedes your normal neurological pathways every day. So that's why people have brain fog, or when you don't sleep enough, or you're ripped out of a super sound sleep that your body's desperately trying to get to. And they know that because people they've done studies where they've kept them awake for days, but they're measuring their brain waves. They inadvertently go back to that REM cycle. You're like sound asleep, wide awake, because it doesn't have a choice. There's only so much biology the brain can perform if the environment isn't clean. And the only time the brain gets to clean itself up is when you're sleeping. Things like PEMF mats and energy deflecting beds, they have all kinds of technologies for that. But sleep science, I think, is woefully underutilized. I don't think the average person thinks much about it. We spend a third of our life in bed. It does seem like a waste, but nothing's better than a good night's sleep for managing our attitude and how we approach our world. And I think that a lot of it, where you look at depression, right? And if you look at depression too, so I started a thing called personalized neuroscience in 2008 for all my Facebook buddies that were getting divorced and depressed, and everybody in their 40s, and they go through this crisis, this midlife crisis. Again, it goes back to the gut, it goes back to inflammation, it goes back to the drop in steroid hormones, where people lose their energy. And when you get serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, oxytocin, all these molecules that the body relies on to balance your mood and your stability mentally start to get out of whack, and you throw stress in there. So cortisol just ruins it all. It just knocks down all the dominoes that you're trying to stack up every day. And that's what stress is, right? So when you don't sleep, you're less prepared. You're more likely to overreact, creating issues that don't exist in our lives. Kids, everyone's busy, right? So you're so busy. I have to think having a full-time job is a death sentence, because you don't have time. Maybe not in the first 10 years, or second 10 years, or maybe it's the last 10 years, but your whole life is spent to this career so you can save a bunch of money so you can live later, when you really should just be living your life. It's not obviously possible for everybody, but simple things like walking, getting a good night's sleep, drinking nothing but water, staying away from things that are harmful, trying to learn how to meditate so that you can change how you respond. And I think sometimes people feel like mental health is like a crutch. Oh, if I have a mental issue, I'm weak, or there's something wrong with you. When the truth of the matter is that your brain is probably the most effective organ entity of your environment because all your senses are dealing with your environment. And so if you're stressed out or freaked out or worried or constantly in a hurry or constantly feeling as if you're being tugged at or under siege, or all of those things have a long-term effect, which I think causes disease.
Yeah, certainly agree. So let's talk a little bit about Boston Biolife and some of the services that you guys provide. I know you're a data resource certainly for the medical industry. How can our friends in the medical industry utilize some of the services that BLL offers?
We are running these live events in regenerative medicine, as I said, teaching orthopedic surgeons, pain management doctors how to do joint injections. And then what we realized was wherever you make PRP, there's lots of other things you can do with PRP. So hair restoration and skin and then sexual wellness. And so we started doing cosmetics and aesthetics, men's health, women's health, and then functional medicine, really looking at inflammation and all the things we talked about earlier. If you don't manage all that, none of this stuff works. So it doesn't matter whether you use fat or PRP or bone marrow. If the patient's chronically inflamed or they're overweight, we used to have the 300-pound people saying, well, can I have an alpha 2 macroglobulin injection in my knee? I'll pay $5,000. It's not going to work because you've got to lose 200 pounds and you're chronically inflamed. So whatever proteins we put in your joints, not going to have. So you're just wasting your money. You can use saline and just wash away the inflammatory cytokines. But really, all those things led to personalized precision health and wellness, which is what I was doing until COVID came. So when COVID came, nobody was running live events again. I was actually leaving one live event to go to another. And the guy that was running it said, don't even come. I just got 80 cancellations. There's only 20 people here. And that was the last time people went to shows for a year or so. So I was watching all these companies come up with their versions of live events online. And it was interesting to watch how, because some just recorded the talks and it was no big. Some people hired Hollywood producers to create studios, but the vendors all got left out because there's no exhibit hall, right? So you could listen to the lecture and you don't have to go there, and you can figure out who's coming to the meeting. You can see them on the chat list. So for attendees, it was great. I can go listen to all my favorite lectures. I don't have to fly, spend money. For the vendors, it stunk. So I was doing webinars anyway, just coming up with topics on regenerative medicine or functional medicine for pain management or medical marijuana, some of the novel things. And some of the vendors are like, what do we do? So I said, why don't we start doing vendor webinars? So I started creating these 45-minute presentations on vendor topics. So maybe PRP or bone marrow company or a shockwave company or an ultrasound company, and if you look on my site, there's probably 500 of them now that we've done. And really, that's where people can come so that this becomes like a repository. Some people say it's like a library. You can go to our webinar thing and punch in like PRP or adipose or fat, and there's an academy that has lectures from all the meetings we ran on different topics like hair restoration or men's health and neurological wellness or aesthetics, all things fat, bone marrow, orthopedics, and they're put into groups. So it's a place where people can come and listen to lectures. I've got academic research papers that validate the science. So I have every peer-reviewed paper on the face of the earth in a journal subscription. It's 9,000 peer-reviewed journals from EBSCO Publishing. It's every scientific paper on the face of the earth in your hand. It's what the medical schools use, the nursing colleges, the pharmacy colleges use, and they let me have it because they look at me as the key. I'm like a conduit to the common man. I'm the sole practitioner, the guy with sole practitioner working in his cash pay business, trying to help people that really don't have access to. They've been to doctors. They've probably been to 10 doctors, and nobody could figure out why they've ringing in their ears, or they can't do this, or they can't do that. So the functional medicine doctors, the MacGyver is maybe their thyroids are too low. Or perfect example, if you've got thyroid disease, you're probably vitamin D deficient, you're probably magnesium deficient. So if you take magnesium and go outside, you're probably going to be fine. But if you go to a doctor, he's going to put you on one of these thyroxine drugs. Now you're screwed. You're never going to be able to undo that. And that's front line. If you go to if everything's a hammer, if all you have is a hammer, right? So that's what the problem is with these complex metabolic diseases. So the functional medicine doctor starts to say, let's look at this panel, let's look at this panel. And what's really happened, which is amazing, is the testing industry has come up with all these new tests for you to ferret out. And now we have AI, which can read through those tests and start saying, hey, this guy's got this problem. The functional doctors had all the know-how, but they don't have the MD. The MDs don't know anything, but they have all the patients. So we're starting to see a merge. And what we see in our site, we have MDs crossing into the functional world. We have non-MDs adding new services and skills to but everyone's learning about the biochemistry of personalized precision medicine, from the epigenetics of the patient through their metabolic profile to their lifestyle and behavior, and what tools can people use. So you have some people like traumatic brain injury patient, right? Maybe an ex-NFL player. We have a whole group of boxers called the Ringer Brotherhood. These are ex-boxers that were fighting 30 years ago or 20 years ago. They have major traumatic brain problems. And what do you do for these people, right? You could say hyperbaric oxygen will help them, or maybe some type of photobiomodulation helmet, maybe some type of neuro stimulation, magnetic neurostimulation, but really it's all of it. So you look at their biomarkers, look at their gut health, look at their lifestyle, look at their nutrition, and then you can bolt on these other tools. Like, for example, a lot of traumatic brain injury patients present with low steroid hormones. Testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen levels are low, but they don't say, let's raise them up. Let's bring them up. So they should be 6, 7, 800. They're only 2 or 3. Let's put the person on HRT. So in order to get somebody on something simple like hormone replacement therapy, a primary care physician is never going to recommend that. A chiropractor or a naturopath might, but he's not an MD. So really the patient has to be the one that is the quarterback of their own care. So I am N of one. I'm my own clinical trial. I'm my own patient. And what's good for me isn't the same as anyone else. And I think as we're evolving medically, and again, I don't throw traditional medicine under the bus because it's come a long way. And there's tools and things that we need in research, like imaging, people looking at lung functionality, using MRI. How do we get, because you still have these deleterious diseases that come from cystic fibrosis. It's a mutation. It's a point mutation in a gene that causes the protein in the lung not to be able to absorb the mucus it secretes. So it builds up, and then the patient can't breathe. There's 6 of those. They're not all the same. Not every patient. So it's not what disease does the patient have, it's what patient does the disease have. And oftentimes that's the approach that you have to take to figure out why these people don't get better, rather than just saying, you got Hashimoto's or you're screwed or whatever. And then things like fibromyalgia, these are terrible. Neuropathy is terrible. And neuropathy are dying nerves. And they're dying because there's no blood supply. There's no blood supply because your vascular stinks, because your heart doesn't pump, because your capillaries are junk, because your glycocalyx is junk, because your body is full of toxins and poisons that you never removed. And it didn't happen in 1 minute. Nothing works by itself. Nothing's quick. Nothing works for everybody. And it takes a long time. So if you're 300 pounds, it's going to take you a year to lose 100 pounds, even on GLP-1. But if you're on a GLP-1, now you got skin issues, you got other issues, you've got all these other problems that come with rapid weight loss, right? So again, everything is nuanced. The good news is there's been a collective consciousness among these physicians to share ideas. And that's what Boston Biolife does. We're a place where someone can come to learn about neuro. So when I run my mini course on menopause, it's not about hormone replacement therapy for women. It's about the pathophysiology of an aging woman and what they're up against epigenetically from all these environmental issues, their lifestyle, their diet, their exercise, their stress, their hormones. And then you can look on the scientific side where people are losing like bone marrow MSCs to rejuvenate ovaries to help people mitigate the symptoms, even to the point where 60-year-old women are getting pregnant. Now, whether you think that's appropriate or not, it's a different story. The fact that it's possible is amazing. So we can affect this, and that's what we're learning. So whether a patient says, I'm going to take a cryo plunge and swim with the dolphins, take ayahuasca, and go on a red light from my personal journey, or someone says, I got to shift my gut microbiome and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to do ground my bare feet and I'm going to get on my PEMF mat, or I'm going to red light this or that, the patients taking charge are really what's changing. And that's the biohacking movement. But we have the physicians in the middle, the academic researchers up on the hill, the patients down below. In all three phases of this, with the government and academia, all come together to provide the environment in which a patient can navigate. But they should never assume traditional medicine has all the answers. You should never assume that one physician knows all. I went to 7 doctors before I had my hernia done because they all wanted to cut me open. And I came from 30 years of minimally invasive surgery. So I'm telling these doctors how they go through my belly button to get up to the thing, and they don't have to cut me open because they can use the keyhole method. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. It's like, how do you know this? I've been standing next to surgeons for 30 years and I know what can be done. And so I finally found the Da Vinci robot guy, poked 3 little holes in me. I was out of there in half an hour. Nobody cut me open. Recovery was 10 times faster. But if I had gone to the first guy who was the best hernia surgeon near me, Harvard, I would have had an NFL lace going down my stomach. He would have cut me open. I would have had a 6-month recovery. Who knows what would have happened? So you have to shop and you have to be your own advocate. And you can't, I'm not saying challenge authority, but I am saying buyer beware. I've seen it with joint replacement. How many times bone on bone? Oh, I need double bilateral knee replacement. And oftentimes, half of those you don't need to do.
I love what you're saying, especially that you made a statement about being the quarterback of your health and manage all those people, because there are so many divergent opinions, some that are consistent with one another. But at the end of the day, it almost sounds like a political statement, but it is our body ultimately that we have to make these
Yeah.
choices. And I'll give you a fast example. And just as we wrap up, too, Joe, I want to make sure everybody knows where to contact you and where to see the webinars. But I had the same thing. I had torn 3 of the rotators in my right shoulder at a track meet. I was throwing a javelin and I slipped and I fell. And anyway, I just messed up my shoulder. First guy I went to, I don't even think the guy knew my name. He walked to my x-ray, said, you need total shoulder replacement. I don't do that. This other guy does that down at another, I won't name the place, another place in Dallas. Here's the guy to see, bye. And at the time, this is about 15 years ago, I'm like, I don't want to have shoulder replacement. I had a buddy of mine that played with the Packers who had shoulder replacement, couldn't get his arm past here. I'm like, I could already get my arm past here. Why am I going to do that? I found another orthopedist right on my street here in Richardson, Texas. And he said, to your point, he said, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's do stem cells. Stem cells were new.
Yep.
All of those things, John. And if at the end none of it works, yeah, then we probably need to do the surgery. So there's a traditional guy saying, let's do all the alternatives. And then if none of them work, hey, we still have that option. I think that's really,
Always do the worst case. People tend to opt for the worst case first, and because that's what they know how to do. And I like to say that we trust our most precious resource to a stranger that knows very little about us. And that's a physician going to a primary care. They only know what you tell them, and they know what labs they're able to do. Right. And so we have to be more mindful of our own understanding. And the other thing I like to say is that we fly airplanes, we program computers, we develop and design technology in companies, and we do all this crazy stuff, but we can't figure out our own metabolism. We've been trained to not think that we're capable of understanding biology. And I think that we don't understand, even the experts understand biology, because there's so many complex interrelationships between all the molecules, and only God can figure it out. But we can't assume that just because a physician says, like going back to your shoulder thing, that could be a stroke, a heart attack, or a rotator cuff. All three are going to manifest as a pain in the brachial plexus region over here. What is it? So it depends who you ask, right? So you have to rule it out. And it's not, and again, they're held to a different standard. They're liable if they do the wrong thing, if they call for a test that's not warranted. They could find half the breast tumors in women if they used MRI instead of ultrasound or X-ray. They're 40% inaccurate. Some are high as 60%. But why won't they do it? It's too expensive. Now there are some false positives because it picks up more minute things. But if you can find a tumor before it's 2 millimeters, you can take it out, right? So you're waiting, and people they say we won't do that because you can feel it. If you can feel it, it's more than 2 millimeters, and you're too late. Right. So the self-exam is a great idea, but it's just an example. Here's a tool that would, in fact, give you an answer. So why not have women come in just like you have your colonoscopy or some other thing and there's even companies that were developing inexpensive MRI models just for breasts. So it wouldn't be so, and they weren't able to get funding. Nobody invested in that. So that's a whole other problem.
So if people want to know more, be they our friends in the medical profession or lay people, they want to listen to some of the great webinars. I listened to some last night myself. What's the best place for them to go and to contact Boston Biolife if they have a desire to?
Yeah, so bostonbiolife.com. My email is my name. It's Joseph Krieger at Boston Biolife. So you can always just reach out to me. And every week we put up a new webinar. Every 6 weeks, I try to do a new mini course. If you go to the video channel button at the end of the webinar thing, you can see all the past webinars and you can watch anything you want as long as you register. You put your name and your email in there, and you can watch a video from 2 years ago on the glycocalyx, or a new one on red light therapy, or something on hyperbaric, or an entire program on neurological wellness. I've done endocrinology, I've done cardiovascular, I've done neuroscience, and I try to come up with a topic that encompasses an idea like inflammation, right? And how we combine it with tools and ideas like tests, imaging, technology, supplements, peptides, behavior, all the different tools. So someone can walk out and say, all right, these patients have these issues. Here's how I test for it. Here's something I can do. And really give them, and really the conduit to the vendors. The vendors are where the technology providers are where education comes from because the average physician hasn't been to medical school for 30 years. So how's he going to learn? And we've all heard the stories about all these doctors are learning surgery in a hotel ballroom. That was me. That was me with my C-arm and my cadaver at a PGA Tour resort teaching these spine physicians how to place a needle so that they wouldn't necessarily have to go and rip the guy's back apart to fix a herniation. That was minimally invasive discectomy. And I'm sure you've seen people that have had these minor spine surgeries that poke a little hole in you. That evolution only came from things like that I did that wasn't taught in medical school. Maybe the younger kids got it in a teaching institution, but if you're a 50-year-old doctor in Dallas, Texas, watching all these overweight people with L5S1 problems and herniated discs, and you have to wait for them to have a fusion. Not if you can do certain things. Mother's the necessity of invention, and I think necessity is the mother of invention. And I think people start to see where there's a will, there's a way, and medicine's no different than that. It's just follow the money, right? So none of this stuff's paid for. So in the biohacking world, just to close up, those are cash pay businesses. I think you'll find a time where there's people that are willing to fund some of the more basic tools for biohacking companies that see the value in mindfulness for their patients, the stress relief, looking at testing, because a lot of the stuff's, you may not even know you have a sensitivity to something that you're exposed to all the time, that if you knew and you just got away from it, it would make you healthier. And that's where the testing comes in.
Joe, this has been a privilege and a pleasure, and I look forward to working together further on all things that can help people. And thank you for your guidance and all the years that you've dedicated to helping people with their health and advancing it for everybody's good. Thank you once again.
Thanks, John. The privilege is all mine. And really, we're here to help each other, and we try to use the tools and strategies that we have to try to express what's possible. And I think Top Doctor Magazine does a great job at highlighting those physicians and those scientists. And it's been a privilege to be associated with John Hyland and the group there. And I think we go together well. And so there's your next issue of Top Doctor. And it really transcends what we're talking about, the biohackers up to the surgeons, because there's a role for everyone in this. But the overarching theme, in my opinion, is a patient-centric approach, where the patient really being part of the care plan team, being their own care plan provider, and it can be family members too. But don't blindly just accept whatever somebody tells you, not because they're bad people or they mean any harm. It's just because the institution itself prevents certain things from being possible. And it's up to you to see through that and to listen and then do a little bit more research and keep asking questions. You'll know when you hear the right answers because it'll make sense. And talk to other people that have been through similar things, because you're never alone. You just think you are. Other people have experienced this and they're happy to share ideas. I think that's part of the collaboration as well.
Joe, thanks again. Appreciate it. And we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.